Hello, and welcome to Waste Not, Circularity in the Design. If you're just joining us this afternoon, I'm Melanie Wendell, the Executive Director of the Sustainable Entertainment Society, and I'd like to thank the Directors Guild of Canada for partnering on this programming. I'd like to acknowledge that I live, work, and play on the ancestral territory of the Blackfoot people, comprising the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations, as well as Treaty 7 signatories, the Tsuut'ina Nation, the Nakota Bearspaw, Chiniki, and Wesley First Nations. This land is also the home of Métis Nation Region 3. And now, I am thrilled to welcome Marian Wihak, who is joining us from Toronto, Canada. She's a production designer, a multidisciplinary artist. She is the DGC National Art Department rep, and she will lead today's conversation, as well as our esteemed panelists. We have Penny Challen, who's joining us from Brisbane, Australia. She's a creative performance designer and researcher with Little Match and Griffith University, as well as Roberto Bonelli, who's joining us from Mexico City, Mexico. He is a production designer with United Talent, as well as Tony Prince Tomety, from Accra, who is joining us from Accra, Ghana. He is a production designer, an art director, and he has an art direction house called Prop Haven in Ghana. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. So thank you, Melanie, and welcome everybody. And thanks for that introduction. And also thank you to SPF for inviting me to moderate this exciting panel. And I'm so looking forward to this conversation today, especially given the far-reaching locations that everyone in this panel is based in. For the most part, I'd like to focus our conversation through the lens of sustainable design practices on productions related to the screen-based industries and performance events. So of course, if they're laterally connected ideas that you have, they're welcome as well. Now let's just quickly review the origins of the term circularity as it relates to design. Some of you who are watching are probably or possibly familiar with that, but let's just give a quick review for those that aren't. Now there's a graphic that we can pop up to just kind of help those of you that are not as so familiar with it. So visionary environmentalist Ellen MacArthur coined the term circular economy in 2010 based on three principles, all driven by design. 1, eliminate waste and pollution. 2, circulate products and materials. 3, regenerate nature. She deemed the circular economy as the only sustainable and ethical way to proceed, in which nothing becomes waste and everything has value, that is increasingly built on renewable energy and materials, is distributed, diverse, and inclusive. So MacArthur has helped turn circular economy into a compelling international concept and driver. And today, as much as we're trying to kind of eliminate the silos by amplifying the wide swath of connected relations and shared concerns driven by the climate crisis, where we are physically and geographically located also helps inform what we know and what we can do. So with this in mind, panelists, please tell us a little bit about yourselves, your design practice, and perhaps the key influences or influencers that prompted you to get involved in design, sustainability, and circularity. So let's start with you, Penny. We can lose that slide, by the way. Thank you. Yeah, let's start with you, Penny, if you could give us a few.
Apologies. Hi, I'm Penny. I am based in Meanjin, Brisbane, which is on Yagara and Turrbal lands here in Australia. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was and always will be Aboriginal land. I'm largely here as a researcher today, although I am a designer. And for me, one of the most interesting aspects of the work around this actually is the notion of climate dramaturgy. Do you want me to talk about that now, Marian?
Maybe bring it up later. You can talk about it now.
Yeah,
but
great. Okay, no, I'll bring it up later.
No, sure, you can talk about it now. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So for me, one of the most interesting sort of theories that have come in the last couple of years is the notion of climate dramaturgy. And this is a concept that's originated out of the UK with a writer, director, dramaturg, Zoe Svensson. And this concept asks us to position everything that we do within the framework of the climate crisis. So instead of going, we occasionally make one work which is about the climate crisis, or we design one thing that's about the climate crisis, that everything we do is situated within this notion. So every single action that we have has an impact, and that we must proceed with that moving forward as designers.
And that's a hypothetical thing, or both hypothetical and practical?
Hypothetical and practical, yeah, absolutely. And it takes a whole of industry sort of approach in terms of its philosophy. So every aspect of what we do is incorporated within that. So as designers, that means how do we start from the creative challenge to address the issue, and how can we actually forefront sustainability within each part of our process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's really interesting. So it is very, very much hypothetical, philosophical, and practical kind of all.
Correct. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. And what about you, Roberto? What were some of your influences or inspirations?
Well, first of all, some of the coordinators from sustainability that I work with were very much part of enlightening me. Because it's strange that we somehow start becoming more sustainable in our houses, but it took a while to, separating the garbage, using less, and all of those things, and it took a while to sort of really understand, hey, we need to apply this to our jobs, and it's also because of the rush in which we are usually placed, particularly in the commercial world, and there's no time for really being able to explore new options. First of all, we look at these documents that are handed over, but usually they come from other countries and may not apply so much to a given situation. So it took really, I think, to really change things, it took, in my personal case, it took me to get into a long format project with a coordinator, a sustainability coordinator connected. Up until then, we weren't really being very successful. We tried, but we weren't really obtaining stuff. So this was a big inspiration. I also took inspiration from Tony, who's here on the panel, because I saw him in Greece, and I thought it was very inspirational. And there were some similarities that I could connect more to than some of the other documents that I've seen. It was very practical, and that was good. And in the same occasion, I also spoke to some of the leaders of the French sustainability group, and how they'd gone about doing things in Europe in particularly, and taking some inspiration from them, and sort of getting over a few hurdles. So that was also a big eye-opener for me, and then basically adapted that into the situation in Mexico with my colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you mentioned that it's William Abello with EcoPro in France, right? You said that they were quite far ahead of. So
correct.
In a resource PDF, which will be shared in the chat later on, I added the link to them just so those that are watching can kind of read up on them as well. That's great, and it's fantastic that Tony was an inspiration for you as well. So Tony, what was your inspiration?
Inspiration. It's good to know I inspired him. I mean, I look, this is news to me, but I mean, for me, it's also the fact that where I'm from, I mean, of course, Ghana has a sustainable development goal journey, and plan, which we're practicing. And I mean, the key things is to eliminate like poverty, get people to live well, hunger especially, and then quality education and stuff like that. So my main priority will be the hunger and poverty, because for me it's a thing where you want to help people, and so you are in an industry where, first of all, it's a growing one. Of course, there's the budgets are small. I mean, people don't have the money to do things like it will be done elsewhere in the world. So what other ways can you, do things and still achieve what you want to achieve? And for someone who loves the constructive art form, I mean, for me, I take a lot of inspiration from that, where you pretty much pick a lot of, things, and you can just turn them around, and it becomes something useful and practical. So it's a thing where I like to practice in my work, and so that's where it's from.
That's fantastic. I mean, yeah, that is so important to be inspired by, your ingredients that actually are right around you, and then to link it to the need is really compelling. So because you all live and work in different parts of the world. I mean, again, just to repeat, Roberto, you're in Mexico, and Tony, you're in Ghana, and Penny, you're in Australia, all warm countries. I'm here in Canada, which isn't cold yet. But anyway, so this next question is kind of a two-part one, and feel free to just blend the two parts together or just answer separately if you want. But so what do you think are the most common barriers that you've confronted with in terms of trying to design more sustainably and circularly in your environment and community? And part two is, can you share some examples of successful circular design projects, either your own or ones that you've seen locally, and how the supply chain, the initiatives and strategies that are rooted in your environs or your local industry successfully illustrate how sustainability can be enacted? So Roberto, why don't we start with you? You answer that.
Okay. I think there are two barriers. One sort of comes from above and one from below. One is the producer saying, "Oh, we can't afford it. We can't afford it." Or we don't have the time or something. And there, I think it's important to state early on that you need time to plan how to be sustainable, because else you're gonna end up in the end with some problems of how you're gonna pass things on. You need to plan it at least before you execute, but possibly even before you design. And one of the things I've experienced, but that's also, comes with being more mature, is that you can actually go and suggest changes to the script, which I probably wouldn't dare some years ago, but now I feel you can actually go in and say, no, they're not burning all these tires in this scene. They are maybe burning a little hot or something, or maybe something else, or maybe they're burning other stuff, or they're doing other things. There can also be some options, and very specifically, we had somebody on a series that I worked on falsifying some things, and then in the end we turned it into a whole thing where they were using old cans to basically get the metal out, and they were saying, okay, all of this is aluminium, and we can make this fake version out of aluminium. And so this was all shown how they were doing this, melting the aluminium, and saying how easy it was. We just studied some YouTube videos basically, but there were things in the script that were changed to that series, and I also had success in convincing the producers to let me have a sustainability coordinator in the soft prep. And for those who don't know, the soft prep is before you start prepping with your crew. So that's just you and the director and the photographer and producers sort of being creative. And in that period, we were able to talk about some specific things, which in the past I felt that those were the big barriers that had failed, because in one experience, the sustainability, and this was early on, so I didn't know so much about it, but the sustainability coordinator started just a few days from when we were shooting. So first of all, we'd used a lot of resources already. And second of all, it came with this big document with then I had limited time to read and to sort of study, because I was so running to get everything done on time. So managing to and again, managing to make it so that it's more practical, without costing more money, that's kind of that's kind of where you need to get to in terms of a practical thing. And just mention quickly, the below barrier is so to convince then, you know, construction coordinators and your general swing gang and whoever it is to work with that mindset and to change a little bit the chip of how things have been done in the past. And it goes all the way down to just being a good example in what you use personally, you know, what you eat on and bringing you know stuff to work, which is you know, in your containers, then you can reuse and stuff like that. Little details, I would say.
You had when we spoke earlier, you'd shared a really great example of those paper mache caves, and I really loved it when you explained that, and you can explain to the attendees here why that's such a great solution where you live in Mexico.
Well, yes, and I heard a very quick little sentence in the opening thing, which is something about going back to original traditions. It was phrased very quickly, I think, just in the opening sequence, but it's basically that. It is going back to original methods that maybe were used hundreds of years ago, because they will most likely be more sustainable. I mean, one has to make sure that the tree sorts and so on are sustainable. In this case here, this is burlap and this is a metal structure, and then that gets covered with cement. So in the specific, we are making underwater cave system, which is cenotes, which is Mexican. And the inspiration here was the Mexican tradition for paper mache figures, which they make some giant figures and parade them around. In this case, paper mache wouldn't go well in the water. So this is burlap and iron in order for it to be light enough to carry, but heavy enough to sink into a pool afterwards. So that's why we made that way. And this one here is a cave system which is made on a stage plus another cave plus another couple of sets. So the sets are made with the sustainable Mexican eucalypto MDF, basically. So first of all, it was eucalypto, then it became MDF. So it's already recycled once, and then it becomes, you know, a set, and then afterwards we separate the panels. But the more interesting thing is in the middle part, you see a cave system, which is basically just paper mache. It's a very thin strips of wood, and then it's just paper mache on top of that, and then a thin layer of cement, basically splattered onto it, and then you can get the textures from there to make it look like stone. So we were not using foams on this one.
So essentially, most of this was a sustainable material to start with, and something that could be somewhat recycled, upcycled after. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. Well, it's a little hard to recycle afterwards the cave things, because it's a mixture of materials.
Right.
But the panels were recycled, and also in the metal structure you see on the water cave was then turned into a shelf system at the constructor's warehouse.
Yeah, and then when we spoke, one of the rationales you gave, which I think is an interesting one, is that in Mexico, where you live, labor is quite inexpensive. So even though this methodology took a little longer, the people knew how to do it, and it didn't break the bank to have it made, even though the construction period of time.
No, exactly. And we use less material also, and we didn't use expensive materials like foam on these ones.
Yeah.
And occasionally we have to use some foam for certain sculptures, and then we've also found the greener materials for that, you know, which are not 100% green, but they are certainly a lot better than what we used to be using. But in this case here, the point being, we could do it in the same time frame and for the same budget. It was just a different setup. It was more people, less expensive materials. So in this sense, this was a win-win situation because we gave more people work and we polluted less, and also it cost the same. So that was for me one of the small victories, or one of the game changers that we have had, which of course applies to this. We were trying desperately to find out, particularly in sculpting, it's hard to recycle. It's much easier with panels.
Modularity comes in, but
Yeah.
still,
Yeah.
it's a great example, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so, Anthony, Tony, do you have something you want to show us and tell us about in terms of, your the barriers or the successful design projects that you've done?
Well, I mean, pretty much the barrier is always trying to convince, whoever you're working with about the other ways or other forms or other materials that you could use. Mostly, usually it's, oh, how believable will it be? Will it look real? Will it be like, what we are used to? Like, will everybody like, what's it going to feel like? And what's it going to like, And so a lot of the time it's been that. Of course, there's always the budget issue as well. But for me, it's yeah, like Roberto said, you actually sometimes you spend less because I have scenic frames built in modular sizes, standard sizes. You can just put those things together like a Lego every time. You don't have to keep making them, and you can always like wrap them off with fabric or wrap them up like top prints, and you can always like just change. I don't have to buy paint, for example. I don't have to spend all the time scenic painting, trying to get off this. It's you just have to know how to do it though.
Do you have some pictures? I think you had some pictures, didn't it?
Yeah, I do have some pictures. I will share the screen and start it. Yeah. I would share, for example, let's just go there. I mean, just like Roberto said, if you look at these two pictures, for me, these are just like simple frames, like Roberto had in his picture. But everything here on the blue side is made up of fabric. Really, I just literally just build these frames and wrap them in the fabric. We wanted a blue wall, and that's what we did. Like, there's nothing. It was less time. I mean, the weight of the structures are not heavy. You can control the weights. You don't have to do too much about it. It's easy to take down, and then you can just always reuse the frames again. I can change the color of the fabric to anything else that I want. Like anytime I can just reuse all these frames anywhere I want. I don't have to keep making them because then until it's so worn out, I'll find use for it. And usually I would give it to the local carpenters in the area or people who want to like make renewable energy for cooking in the local communities. And the same picture on the right is all made from fabric. I mean, pretty much fabric and some top prints on the below side and pretty much then the set is done. So
why fabric, not paint? Just yeah.
I mean, also there's so what I'm getting is I'm saving money by not painting, because if I get a fabric in the color, then I don't need to paint it. So it's done two things for me already. I get a color, and then of course I get something which is quick to fix, and then I can just fix it, and I fix it so well that you don't. I mean, if you don't know, you don't know. You have to be told that it's fabric. So that's why I'll choose it. And then again, of course, it cuts down the budget. But once you keep doing some of these things, then people actually would now say, oh, okay, then this is possible. So like this is we don't have to buy too much Luan. We don't have to do too much of that. And for example, this pictures over here, same technique. Building too much, but
that's the modularity of it. It's really kind of amplifying the importance of modularity, isn't it?
Exactly. So pretty much you have scenic walls and you just put them together, and it's same technique. Put these tabs on, and then you probably just dress a set, and then it's quick, fast, time. I mean, it doesn't take too much time, and everybody. I mean, once you film it and no one knows, like if you don't say it to anyone, no one is ever gonna know. So for me, that's what really is, because I can keep using all these things every time.
Yeah, that's great. And Penny, I don't know if you have an example like that. I know when you and I spoke earlier, in terms of the barrier, and I don't want to kind of like cast a pall on possibilities, but it was interesting how you talked about how the politics of
Yeah.
the world kind of impact what you can do as well. So
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really I mean, I think I've heard a lot of things here so far, and there's a lot of discussion around another theoretical concept, which is permissions hierarchy, which is another Svensson concept, which it talks to who actually gives permission to do what in the process. So I think it's really interesting, Roberto, when you were talking about, well, you know, having to manage upwards in terms of ensuring that you have time to manage your circularity. It's really key. I thought that was really interesting. And yeah, we see that all the time here in Australia as well. So, you know, some of my research is about how do we empower designers to be able to manage upwards if there's not top-down permission coming through. I was also really interested, Tony, you talking about how around modularity, because I think we all know that modularity is such a critical part of managing this problem. And in particular paints, like we all think if we use acrylic based, or we call them water based, which I actually think is the biggest greenwashing myth of all time. And it's not. It's they're latex or they're acrylic. They're all resin based. It's a petrochemical problem. And the moment you apply that to any surface, you can't recycle that fabric. You can't reuse it. You can't it goes into landfill. And it breaks down into microplastics. So paint's a really problematic material. So Tony, I thought that was a really genius idea that you're talking about there. Really, really interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but in Australia, look, we've had a political climate over the last decade, which has been sort of has really changed the language around how we talk about climate change. For a long time, we had a right-wing government, and because the coal sector is so important and the mining sector is so important to our overall GDP, there was a big impetus on that right-wing government to say, no, coal's fine, we're not ruining the environment. And around the same time, I don't know, did you want to bring up that slide if it's available? Just jumping really quickly with this, is sort of this kind of just gives a sense of, and I come from a performing arts background, but this actually applies into the film sector as well. And it kind of, it talks to this top-down hierarchy of when you have a funding body that is kind of calling the shots in many respects about what kind of projects get made and how projects get made, you see a real change. So this is like a little overview of the last 20 years in Australia, for example, and you can really see what the impact of having sort of partisan politics can impact on the debate. So we were actually doing extremely well in Australia around sustainable practices. The Sydney Theatre Company was doing incredible work. There were film initiatives happening at this time as well. But then we had a lot of uncertainty around arts funding in Australia for a period of time. And I think, as you can see, where it talks about the world scientists warning of a climate emergency, I actually do think that was a real trigger for people. So thank you, scientists, for doing that, because I think it really did change the conversation for everyone, and people got angry. So a lot of initiatives just started being reactionary to what was going on in the political climate of Australia at that time. But again, there's a lot of, for designers, there's a lot of upward management. So we find that there's a lot of designers in Australia doing amazing work, but they're really struggling with the time issues that you're talking about, in particular, Roberto, having to manage bringing in, so a friend of mine, she's been doing a series of Netflix productions here in Australia. And anything to do with sustainability is absolutely beyond the task and time that's been required of those designers working in that space. So you see the art director, the assistant art director, you see the props buyer, they're all taking sort of time out of their personal lives to actually make sure objects are rehomed correctly, that the recycling occurs correctly. So there's a lot of there's not additional hours paid for to make this work happen a lot of the time in Australia, and it really relies on designers forefronting it. I think that's what I'll have to say for the moment.
Okay. That it's really interesting because what you've painted out here is in Australia. I think all of us in our respective countries can sort of understand how those kind of ebbs and flows also impact what we can do here, and the world is in such a kind of a bit of a fractious place right now. It's hard to know where things are going to be there to support it. But anyway, it was really interesting to just have you sort of chart that out as it affected you in Australia. I want to just, because we only have a few more minutes before we want to go into question and answers, but I do want to sort of focus a little bit also on Anthony's the first prop house in Ghana, and maybe you could show us some pictures about that. And I think it's just impressive. It's hard enough. It's a hard business we're in. It's hard enough to just get your jobs, but then to also take on the job of an entrepreneur and create a venue is quite something. So it's quite inspiring. So if you want to just show us a few pictures of that and tell us a little bit, how hard it was, again, just maybe a few minutes, give us a capsule of how long you've had that shop and what you did to get it started and that kind of thing.
So this is Prop Haven. This is a space, and this is Challen, a 400-meter square food space. It's just been over the years since which productions did I do? Since I worked on Beast of No Nation and Black Earth Rising, and pretty much every show that I've worked on, I've collected the stuff. I've collected and kept the stuff.
This was the first prop house in Ghana completely, right?
Correct. Yes. Correct. Mind you, this also came up because, in film school, I struggled finding things you bought things that you didn't need. You were looking for things that you wouldn't have use for after,
This helps you out too.
Exactly. And at the point I was like, okay, I need to write a research paper on this and what the effects were for the industry in this part. So that was pretty much my final year thesis topic in film school, So then again, I knew there was a problem. And so then after 12 years, being in the industry and working, I thought, look, let's start collecting these things. There's no point in buying this, I don't need it, and then what do I do with it? Throw it away, discard it. Sometimes you don't have a need for it again. You don't even know where to take it. And so I started collecting everything. And sometimes people call me and say, oh, I have this. Do you want it? Do you want to come and look at it? Do you want to, pick it up or stuff like that? And I just go and look at it and I pick it up. And what this has done is a lot of the budding film makers in the country or anyone who's making film, it's not going around buying stuff that they don't need after use and are going to use again. They come into Prop Haven, which is in Accra, and take these things, rent them out, and go and use them, and then bring them back. Sometimes we make some of the things ourselves from some of the materials that I use for my sets. Like there's grand pianos that I've made myself, using whatever. Some of the things we just make because we have a serial carpenters and a skill to be able to do that. All the shelving, even the phone booth in this video, even the phone booth we made ourselves with everything else that we had here. This is not bought or anything. We just made it and sprayed it up and things like that. So it's been challenging. I didn't know what it was trying to run a proper house, alongside trying to do production design. The only good thing I knew was it was going to help me. I didn't need to go be collecting things when I needed it, it was beneficial.
That's fantastic. These do exist in other larger centers, but the fact that you felt that there was a need for this, that addresses things on quite a few levels, is just so fantastic. And I think it's really bold and inspiring that you did that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for showing those pictures. Yeah. And Roberto, and any of you can jump in and answer these. I have a few more key questions I want to get to before we get to open up to Q&A. But Roberto, you've worked on some fairly sizable projects with large crews, and you've kind of talked about it already. But what do you do to rally the team? And I guess what do you do? Like, how do you get that launched with people that maybe aren't familiar with it? Yeah. So just that strategy, what do you use?
I think, well, first of all, you have to show some examples, and then also you have to personally yourself be sort of a good example in order to say, well, if I can do this, you can too. And it takes a little while to adjust, but there is, I think if you can show it on a personal level, also that inspires in general. I think people will often be a little concerned with new techniques when there's not a lot of time to do a project. And that's also why going back to even older techniques is sometimes easier because then they say, oh yeah, sure, we could do that, because it kind of feels the need to it. And then it's just being persistent, because I also found that there would be a little bit of kind of behind your back a little bit trying to do things, so it's very important to make sure that people know that this is serious, and it's not just the politics, it's actually it's actually for real. I think there's a tendency, and I think rightfully enough in the beginning, to feel that some of it was just sort of imposed and a kind of a greenwashing things from big brands to try and look greener. But once you get into it, then I think people get really sort of happy about it. And I think another sort of incentive also is the possibility of being able to give stuff away to actually, because in the case of my constructor with the cave, I said, you're going to get all the iron at the end, and all you need to do is recycle it and somehow, and I said, okay, great, I'm going to make some shelves. Okay. And then you need to send me a photo of the shelves. And that happened. And so that was fine. But there's been a tendency from producers also to say, why are you giving away our stuff? And now the argument is, well, we're giving it away because it makes sense to give it away. It makes sense to be sustainable. It makes sense for other things. And later on, if you need a favor, all the material is here, and you can get it cheap or you can get it for free, particularly with the prop houses. Because before it seemed a little bit like there was suspicion because, why are we giving props away to your friends, or why are we, and now it's becoming legit. So explaining that and making it legit is also an important thing. And being able to say, look, we have all of this stuff. Who wants to take this and this and this? And understanding it's part of a recycling process. So I think that's a way to change a little bit the chip, both with producers and both with the crew.
I think and I think what's been mentioned here, and we've probably all heard it before too. There is a business case for kind of recycling, not just an ecological, environmental case. There's a business case for making reuse of materials like this. So I think what your examples have really just leaned into that quite a lot. Before we open it up, I just want to ask this kind of last question for each of you: what you think next steps are regarding sustainable and circular design? Like, what do you hope to see? Like, say in 12 months, like we were to meet back here in 12 months, I'll go through each of you and just like, what would you hope to sort of see has shifted, or what do you want to focus on in the next 12 months to land somewhere where it seems better? Penny, let me start.
I really want to see the Australian government take action in terms of funding responsibility. I want to see that in the UK very recently, all funding outcomes for certain projects have been tied to environmental sustainability targets, and I want to see that occur for arts projects in Australia. I think we're probably a couple of years off that, but I think it's coming, and the moment that comes, it's going to have a huge top-down effect, so fingers crossed.
Fantastic. I'm there with you on that kind of initiative for sure. Tony, what about you?
Well, for me, I want to see the training institutions like pretty much bring up these conversations every time. Once you teach the people, once you train the people in the industry, you must bring up these conversations. They must be able to develop the new techniques and new ways and new styles of, making things that will be sustainable. And for me, sometimes I go back to my film school and I show them these things and I share the knowledge that I know or that I have developed or that I've found. And then the students that come to me and also learn, pick up these things. And I see a few of them doing the same thing. So I just feel like once that's going on, it takes time, but once that becomes a practice, everyone is just going to keep doing that. So I think that's what I want to see. Yeah.
Really important, that mentorship and just case study, live by example, set the example. Yeah. What about you, Roberto?
Yeah, these are two important points, and they sort of point in different directions also. So to what Penny says, there is something we need to change, and we need to push for that on a governmental level also in Mexico. We manage to talk to the heads of the big studios here, which is government run in Mexico City, and made a plan to make the whole studio more sustainable. So this is separating waste. This is to do with having better ways of having energy within the studio, all kinds of things. So that's probably also more than 12 months away. But this is a long-term project, and the fact that actually the analyses have been done with the collaboration of sustainability coordinators, which we met on our projects and basically joined together, then at least that's something that's pushing, and if we can just get the politicians to approve it, then that could be hugely sort of efficient. Then the other side is exactly what Tony says. We need to try and educate all the people who are starting, and also some of the people who are just doing smaller projects who have no sustainability coordinators or so on. We need to expand our knowledge, first of all, but then we also need to make this network of sharing things. So that's what we plan to do for the next 12 months is to make it's going to basically be a chat where people give things away with permission from producers or whatever thing. And it's just basically, it's a much more expansive network than just, a few designers knowing each other and passing on stuff and so on. And
turns into a system of sharing.
Yeah. Yes.
So there's a few questions in here, which I can't remember if we have 5 minutes now or 10 minutes, but I'll go through the questions. The first one is to Roberto. I think it's referring back to, we have 10 minutes. Okay. So it's referring back to, I think, to your cave design. And there's, hi, Roberto. Have you researched mycelium, however you decide to say it, to replace polystyrene foam for sculpting? What happened to the thin layer of cement after its purpose as caves, as the caves in the cenotes? Anyway, you know what the question is, right? What happened to the thing afterwards? And have you thought about that other, a more sustainable material at the front end? And also connected to that, were those fabrics that you use synthetic or natural?
So the fabric we used was natural because it's just basically burlap sacks. And in terms of the materials, we have to adapt to the materials that's available locally. So we look into materials, and with the coordinator, we basically project per project make an evaluation. What is the most sustainable in this case? In the case of the cement, once it's attached to the burlap, it's not possible to separate. But we did, and this was due to savings in general on the project. So from our internal part of savings in the art department, we got permission to use that money to send our waste to be converted to biodiesel. which was one of the coordinators, had the knowledge of how that could be done. So, but this is a process that costs money to the production. But luckily, we had some savings and were allowed to spend it, because not always. Sometimes when you have savings in your department, the production used them for other departments. But in this case here, luckily, we were allowed to do that.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and this could go to all of you. Are there any practices you adopted thinking they were sustainable options for production design, but then you later found out that they weren't? So it's open to all of you.
Well, I can very surely say yes, and that's because it changed all the time, and that was my experience in the beginning, absolutely. But you just have to keep on going.
Tony or Penny, do you have anything to add to that? Maybe
I mean, of course, like you said, it just keeps changing. You keep developing, you keep finding yourself, and you keep finding different things. And it's a journey that's never gonna like end. It never ends.
But I think that the question perhaps is more like, did you use something that you thought was sustainable, but maybe really it was greenwashed, and it really wasn't. That, I think in a way, that's how I'm taking that question. I think yes, our materials are changing all the time, but let's say you use something thinking, oh, like the eucalyptus wood, for example. I mean, Roberto, you said you used it because it's local and all that kind of stuff. Anyways, that's just as an example. Is there something that you used thinking this is a great solution because it's sustainable, it's recyclable, and then you found out that, well, it's not really?
I mean, for me, not as yet though, because I mean, pretty much everything that I've used like this, I've always found recyclable use for it. Like, you know, even when I print backdrops, you know, to use like that, even though it's latex, the thing is, in the local industry, there's little stalls and stuff that sew little canopy covers with it, and so I can literally just ship off the print backdrop to them, and I mean,
so it gets another life at least.
Exactly. So it saves, you know. So for me, it's not yet. When I do, I would put it out there.
Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Okay, my sustainability services business is currently working. I think that's the name of a company. My sustainability services business is currently working with a local municipality film hub in Northern Ontario, along with the Restore, which is part of Habitat for Humanity. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, to allow for us to create a space for sets, props, materials to be stored and reused by other productions. That's fantastic. I hadn't heard about that. Any suggestions on how to encourage productions from the top down to participate in this initiative? So I guess, you know, since Tony, you run your own shop of a similar nature, maybe you have something to lend to this, or again, it's open to all of you.
Yeah, I mean, I've been to the Restore, so I know what a Restore looks like. In fact, I've picked up stuff from the Restore and brought them. Yeah, so that's a good thing that they're doing. And for my side, yes, people do call me and say, "Oh, do you have the scenic flats? Can I borrow a scenic flats? Can I rent scenic flat? Because then I store these things, and then that way they can, you know, if you need them, you can always come back for it." So yes, there've been instances where people have come to our place, our direction house, and rented our stuff.
I think, you know, part of this question, and it isn't woven into this, but part of it is any suggestions on how to encourage productions to participate in this initiative. And it was one of the questions I had because it was running out of time, but it impacts on both IP and creativity. So maybe we can just talk a little bit about that. Like, so the idea of reusing materials from other shows, whether they're full flats or whether they're just particular assets and stuff. What are your thoughts on how it impacts your creativity and originality and concerns around IP? Penny, why don't you start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, IP and sort of reuse is something that we've been talking a lot about here. It's a conversation that the Australian Production Designers Guild has been reviewing. It's still under review. So the Australian Production Designers Guild are working towards how we can actually better frame this discussion. We suspect it is actually to do with how we define percentages of work. I think Marian, you and I did have this discussion briefly the other day. It surprised me to realise that it actually affects the film industry less than you think. And for me in Australia, what we have found is that there seems to be a blanket. It all goes to the tip. And the rationale for that has been to do with, well, the IP belongs not just with the designer, but with the film. And because it belongs with the film, that we can't risk that being misused in any way. I don't think designers feel that way about their work. And I think that's really important. And I actually think it's really important for producers to start listening to that voice in regards to how we feel about our own IP.
Just before the other two jump in, and just on that note, and when, oh shoot, can you see me? My computer just went black. I hope you can see me.
I see you.
And hear me. And anyway, what a construction coordinator who I work with a lot in on this subject of sustainability feels quite strongly that you can take set elements that seem to have a real specificity about them, but they can be reused quite easily. So it isn't like Disneyland's castle or something like that. Almost nothing gets used in its entirety. And if it's a whole set you're actually getting your hands on because it's cheaper or available to you or whatever, yeah, we want to change it anyway as designers. So it's not like we're just going to use it anyway. Just, I'd love to, Roberto and Tony, if you have anything to add to that. And we have 2 minutes left.
I absolutely agree with Penny. I think most of us, I mean, there's a few, and I think maybe in the beginning you've just used a lot of effort on making a set, and then you see it already coming out in a commercial or something. You know, sometimes we do up a location and then it stays that way, and it's a little annoying to see it in another movie. But then you get used to it, and I think this is a little thing that you just have to accept. You know. For the better grade, to basically give up your intellectual property in order to recycle. And as you say, it's not gonna be exactly the same anyway, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I agree to that, and and I really think that designers can always come up with something else. They can take whatever, but it's design. I mean, you probably use it upright. I want to turn a landscape. You know, the effect is already changed. You got something else from that. So I totally agree with people trying to use stuff. It's however you want to use it. And I don't think any designer will want to use your stuff the way you used it anyway.
Exactly.
They don't want to see the same thing. They're just going to change it. So it's going to be different at the end of the day.
I think also a bit of myth busting is needed in terms of people saying, well, it'll just take me longer. It's easier to start with a blank piece of paper and just start from scratch. And I think that's kind of part of the normalization of circularity, and also some myth busting is needed in that as well. So we have another few, about 2 or 3 more minutes. So is there any other questions? Okay, and what common art department building materials should be banned for use on set for safety and environmental concerns? And what new building materials are revolutionizing sustainable set prop building? So we only have like a quick, okay, yeah, Penny?
I've got this one. Styrofoam, ban it. But there is actually a really new exciting product that is being tested in the UK right now that can replace it. And it is a type of styrofoam replacement that's made out of sugarcane. So watch this space, because that could be quite a revolution. That's the big one I've got.
Okay. Yeah, fantastic. That's great. Tony, Roberto?
Well, no, absolutely. I need to know about this material, because I was going to say the same thing. And we have a ton of sugarcane in Mexico, where basically after they use the sugarcane, most of it just get burned. So this would be a revolution here if we can make that happen. So
fantastic.
I can tell you for a fact that on my side, it's not really a lot in terms of material using, in production design. That's what we use. But obviously, I mean, on top of our mind, anything that's latex, we know is harmful to the earth. I mean, I would say, let's get rid of it.
So just to wrap up, there's this resource, a PDF of a resource link with various things in it, some webinars, links to webinars, some sources and suppliers, including Prop Haven. I put that in there. And that's been shared through Swapcard. I just got that message there. So that's a resource thing. And you as panelists, hopefully, I think it was in the email we shared last night. So it lists just a few. There's a lot of information out there. And you guys have just provided some great feedback and information about what you're doing within your communities. And also, I think a lot of that information can be shared across the board. And just want to thank you all for being here and for the time you've put into our prep chat and for this conversation. And it's really so exciting to talk to colleagues from around the world like this. And I think we just have to try to do what we can to normalize it, obviously, as we all are. And I think it isn't brain surgery. I keep saying this whenever I have these little talks. It's actually less difficult than people think. So champions like you guys, hopefully the dials will get pushed across the board. So Melanie, are we done here? Are we getting to evaporate here, pumpkin time? Or what?
It's so true. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being here, everybody. It's a pleasure. And I really appreciate your time here this evening, this morning. So thank you for being with us. And I just have a little thank you and some closing here that I'm going to share. So I'm just going to say, firstly, this marks the closing of our third of 3 conferences for 2024. This is my 4th year producing this conference, and every year I am deeply humbled and I learn so much from everybody who joins us. We are making progress, I can tell. And I am deeply grateful for everybody's time, energy, efforts, not only today, but in your work and what you're doing to help us change this industry. And doing it together is what we need to do.